Perfect. Thank you. You're welcome. Next. So the table is wobbly, the wind is blowing, the lighting's weird, and there's definitely like construction going on in the background, so we're just gonna give this a try. Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie. I was a transfer student at UC Berkeley, but I am now a recent graduate. I literally graduated just a few days ago at the time of filming this video with my bachelor's in anthropology, and I am very soon headed off to New York City to start my master's degree at Parsons School of Design. I am an academic lifestyle content creator where I talk about pathways to higher education. And in today's video, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. I am going to share a very small piece of my experience in higher education. So when I came to Berkeley in my junior year, at the end of each semester, I would sit down and talk about the classes that I took, what I liked about them, what I thought about them, and what the course content was, and what lectures were like, and how much homework I had. And my senior year has been kind of intense, so I forgot to film it last semester. So since I've graduated, I thought it'd be cool to just sit down and do all the classes I took in my senior year as a student at UC Berkeley in the Anthropology department. Currently, we are sitting outside the Archaeological Research Facility, and hopefully I'll get the chance to take you guys to some of the other locations on campus where I spent a lot of time. But for now, why don't we just go ahead and get started with my first semester as a senior in fall of 2021. So really quick before I get into it, I should tell you guys kind of what the expectations are for an anthropology degree at UC Berkeley. We do have requirements in order to graduate. So first of all, in your lower divisions, you have to take Anthropology 1, 2, and 3, which is Intro to Sociocultural Anthropology, Intro to Biological Anthropology, and Intro to Archaeology. I took the equivalent of those courses at community college. And then for upper division units, we have to take Anthro 114, which is the History of Anthropological Thought. I took that in my junior year. And then we have to have one course in each of the three subfields, so Archaeology, Biological, and Sociocultural. We have to have one area, so in a geographic area of the world course, one method course where we learn a practical method in anthropology, so ethnography, GIS, archaeology, so on and so forth. And then we have to take 5 upper division electives. By the time I got to my senior year, I basically had fulfilled all of my requirements for graduation. I had all of the electives that they asked us for. I had Anthro 114. I had an areas and a methods course. So all that was left was just taking other electives that I thought sounded interesting. So I took Anthro 112, which is a biological anthropology course called the Paleopathological Perspective, Anthro 136A, or Museum Curation and Exhibit Design, and then Anthro 196, which was Historical Archaeology. Each one of those courses was 4 units. I also took a 1 unit course and a 1 half unit course, which was my undergraduate research apprenticeship program where I work in the archaeology labs with a graduate student, and then a physical education class. It was just like dance fitness because I wanted to exercise more last semester. Okay, so starting with Anthro 112, the Paleopathological Perspective. This was a lecture style class, which means that we had a larger class size than a seminar. I think there are probably around 60 students in that class if I had to estimate. We met twice a week. We would come in and sit down. The professor would stand in front of the classroom and would give us a lecture based on whatever it was we were learning in that module that week. I'm just going to read out the course description real quick. It says, "This course will explore the record and human experience of health and disease in the past with particular focus on approaches in bioarchaeology. We'll learn and evaluate the biological realities of health and disease as evidenced from bioarchaeological data, so how we diagnose morbidity, prevalence of mortality in the past, and use a biocultural lens to analyze and interpret the etiology of disease in the past." So basically, I like to describe it as how we interpret illness and disease from the bioarchaeological record, which means human remains that come from the archaeological record. From that, we also attempt to take a biocultural approach, which aims to understand how humans interacted with and understood health and illness in the past. Because this is Berkeley, of course, we did talk about some of the ethics behind bioarchaeology, the problems of bioarchaeology, and just like some of the concerns about like how we gather bioarchaeological data and what the implications of that are. We also talked about things like diet and nutrition, infectious diseases in the past. We also talked about pathology in terms of like colonization and contact between 2 separate groups of people. What I found really interesting about this course is that it tried to link how we understand health and illness in the past to how we understand it in the present, and what we can learn from the past in terms of like the spread of contagions, plagues in the past, and what that means for plagues in the future. We actually read a lot of stuff that was published literally like months before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, so that was interesting. As well as other things that we might not necessarily consider pathologies or illnesses, like how our bones might be shaped by the physical labor that we do or the clothing that we wear, and things like epigenetics, which is like the passing on of trauma within your genetics. So looking at how that trend has changed through time and space, even into contemporary humans. I hope I'm explaining all of this okay. According to the syllabus, in terms of assignments, we had weekly summaries and enthusiasm, which is basically where we take all the readings and we try to summarize it in our own words and relate to it in some kind of way, so expressing enthusiasm for the course. Every student was placed into a group, and then that group at some point in the semester had to do a student-led class discussion where we actually had to do the readings in advance and develop the questions and then like talk the classroom what we were thinking when we proposed those questions. We also had 2 quizzes that were super basic. They mostly just had to do with like understanding anatomy and key concepts so that we could like build a foundational knowledge that we could then think critically about. Lastly, we had the creative impact assignment, which was our big final project where we had to basically do anything but an essay, and for that class I actually did my Core Sets in Archaeology video, which if you haven't seen, go ahead and check it out in the description below because I had so much fun putting that video together. Personally, I really liked this class. I think that it was really interesting to learn something about bioarchaeology because I'm not much of a biological anthropology person, and actually something my professor said at the beginning of the course was what sparked my interest in the bioarchaeology of corsetry and what inspired me to make that video, and ultimately actually inspired me to go on to pursue my master's degree and apply for the programs that I applied for. And the professor who taught this class actually wrote one of my letters of recommendation for grad school. So overall, great course. I forgot to mention the instructor. It was taught by Sabrina Agarwal. I want the sun to stop moving. Ah! Okay. Next course was Anthro 136A, the Museum Exhibit Curation and Design. This course description says, this course provides a practical introduction to contemporary museum approaches to exhibition design with particular application to the design of exhibits that represent cultural heritage. Both the theory of museum exhibit design and practice will be considered. So this course was more of a seminar style class. We met twice a week and there was probably no more than 20 to 30 students in this class, and it was very much driven by our weekly readings, and we would sit around the table and we discuss those readings and try to think critically through the kind of changes that are happening in museum spaces and exhibit and curation design. But this course was also kind of structured with like the first half being seminar style where we actually go through the readings and develop that critical understanding, and then the second half was actually focused on applying the knowledge that we gained from those readings. So we had a total of 4 assignments in this class. The first one was a museum exhibit review where we actually had to go online and find an online museum exhibit to explore and look at, and then we had to write a museum review based off of what we had read about museum reviews in our course at that point. Our second assignment was actually a second museum exhibit review. The first one, everyone did the same museum exhibit. The second one, we had to pick one on our own, and I don't remember what I did. What did I write about? I wrote about nope, I don't know what I wrote about. Never mind. Moving on. Assignment number 3 was our final project planning exercise. So our final project was a class-wide collaborative project where, as a class, we broke up into different teams that reflect the actual teams of a museum and took on different tasks and roles to put together a proposal for a museum exhibit. We did a 1-page summary of the nature of the request because part of this proposal was applying for an NEH grant, or the National Endowment for the Humanities grant, so we could actually like pretend like we were getting funding and get experience writing grants. The third one was we had to do a review of the NEH checklist of elements. The NEH actually has specific guidelines and requirements for grant writing, so we had to make sure we were providing all the materials that they were asking of us. And then our last assignment, assignment 4, was actually taking all of the different parts of this museum exhibit, putting it together and presenting it to a panel of museum professionals who acted as an NEH grant review board for us. I was part of the exhibit design group, so I actually got to do things like pick out the color palette and figure out what our display cases would look like and the organization of the museum and how people would flow through it. We also, in the design group, got to have the opportunity to have a say in how the histories of that exhibit were going to be presented, which histories we wanted to tell, and how they kind of all integrated together to create a particular story for this museum. Yeah, clearly I really liked this class a lot. I think it was one of my favorite classes from the semester, and it is also another reason why I decided to go to grad school. Oh, and it was taught by Professor Rosemary Joyce. Okay, moving on. Next, for my 4-unit classes, we have Anthropology 196, or Historical Archaeology as Social Justice, which was taught by Professor Lori Wilkie. This was a seminar style class, so we had a very small group of people. I think we had like 15 students in that class, and everything was based on reading and the discussions of the readings. We only met once a week for this course, and the course description says, Historical Archaeology is a subdiscipline of anthropological archaeology that emerged hand in hand with the 1960s civil rights movement and the rise of ethnic studies. Part of the same critique of Eurocentric history telling, historical archaeology first positioned itself as a discipline focused on telling untold or ignored stories of the American past. In the last 2 decades, the discipline has increasingly recognized its role in understanding contemporary heritage narratives, the need to develop community-driven research, the need to diversify as a discipline, archaeology as a tool of anti-racism, and the role of archaeology in discussions of livability. Because this is a seminar-style class, most of our grading was based off of attendance and participation and not so much our actual homework assignments. And then in terms of assignments, we had 4 papers altogether. 2 of them were like assignments throughout the semester, 1 of them was optional to make up missed classes, and then the last one was our final paper. Each of our papers was kind of more of like a small reaction paper to some kind of historical archaeology thing. I think our professor called them position papers, so we had to go and find something in recent news, so like within the last 12 months, about historical archaeology, and then use the readings and the discussion that we'd had in class to apply critical analysis to what that historical archaeological investigation was, take a position on whether or not it was good historical archaeology and what that historical archaeology could mean for the field moving forward. And then we had our final paper, which was actually a book review, so we had to select what's called a monograph, which is a book that is written by a single author. We had to read it, and then we had to write a book review on it, and it had to be based around historical archaeology. So I actually wrote mine on this book here, which is called The Archaeology of Clothing and Bodily Adornment in Colonial America by Diana DePalo-Loren, who is actually, I think, the director or the curator or something like that at the Peabody Museum. So overall, another vastly enjoyable class. One of my favorite things about Berkeley is the seminar style classes, where we get to come to class and actually talk about the concepts that we're reading and get to hear what other people's perspectives and understandings are, so that we can kind of work through this critical information together as a whole, as a class, because doing it by yourself is really hard, and it's really awesome just getting to hear how other people understand the material. Alright, and then like I said, the last 2 things I had a half-unit physical education dance class. We met twice a week and we danced for like an hour and a half. Pretty simple. We were really mostly just graded on like participation and effort. It wasn't anything difficult. I had a lot of fun doing it. If I managed to capture any footage of that though, I'll put it here so you can see me dancing really horribly. And then finally, I had my 1-unit undergraduate research apprenticeship program where I was working in the ethno-archaeobotany lab. Is that what it's called? Basically, I was working in an archaeology lab with a graduate student under Christine Hasdorf, looking at archaeological food remains to kind of determine the type of food and the distribution of that food in a particular area of the American Southwest to better understand agricultural and food patterns. That is that for the classes I took in my first semester of my senior year, fall 2021. Why don't we take a little bit of a walk and go find another location to talk about the last classes I ever took as a student at Berkeley. All right, let's go. Yeah. 2 things. 3 things. 1, it's really bright outside. 2, I almost crashed a wedding. 3, that's my favorite building on campus and I love walking past it every single time I do, and I'm gonna really miss it. Okay, that one's locked. Let's see if we can find an unlocked classroom to film in. Nope. Nope. Not an entrance. Nope. Okay, floor 2, let's try that. Nope. Yes! And we're back. Alright, we are currently in Wheeler Hall, which is a building here on campus that is meant for like general classrooms, for lectures and discussion sections, which, if you don't know, a discussion section is basically when you have a lecture that has a lot of students and there's not a lot of opportunity to answer everyone's questions or have discussion. We're broken up into these like smaller class groups. We meet at another time or day with a graduate student instructor, or a TA as other people call them. Berkeley just has to be special. And we get to like actually go over the course materials, get our questions answered. Also, sorry, I keep moving around. I'm just looking for good lighting. I thought it would be fun to bring you guys to like one of the classrooms that I actually had class in this semester, so you can see like what it's like to sit in a classroom with a Berkeley student, because I'm like so important, you guys. I'm a Berkeley student. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about my last semester here at Berkeley, which, if you've been following along my channel, I did vlog the entire thing, so if you want to see the day-to-day life, you can go ahead and check out those videos. But for now, let's talk about my classes. So I actually ended up taking a lot of classes that were outside my major this semester, and for a very particular reason. When I decided that I was going to go to grad school, I wanted to do it in something related to fashion and fashion history from an anthropological perspective, but that meant that I was technically switching fields. I was no longer studying archaeology, and when I decided to apply to these programs with the thought that I might get in, I realized I should probably take some classes that have to do with what I might study in graduate school. So we don't have a lot of courses in the anthropology department about things like dress history or understanding textiles or like clothing and dress and bodily adornment and costume and that kind of stuff. So I had to look outside of my wheelhouse and take classes in other departments this semester. So because of that, I ended up taking Media Studies 190, which is Beauty, Feminism, and Fashion and Global Popular Culture, History of Art R1B, which is a writing course, and it's called Reading and Writing About Visual Experience, Understanding Textiles. Then I had one more anthropology class called Anthro 160 AC, or Forms of Folklore. Then I took two one-unit courses. One was a DeCal, which stands for Democratic Cal, which are classes that are developed, proposed, and taught by students. They range in their variety of topics from everything like Neuroscience 101 to personal finances to fan fiction to the one that I took, which was called UC Hogwarts, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a critical analysis of the Harry Potter book series. Then lastly, I continued my undergraduate research apprenticeship program position with the grad student that I worked with last semester, so I continued to work in the same lab doing the same archaeological investigation from last semester. Alright, where to start? This time, let's go from least units to most units. So, my one-unit course, UC Hogwarts. This course description says, in this course we will help legitimize the genre of fantasy by exploring topics, themes, and issues brought about by the series. In addition, we will try to understand what makes the series so compelling and what has made it the best-selling series of all time. We hope to prove that Harry Potter is a work of academic merit to our students, and to do this we will discuss the history of magic, witchcraft, and wizardry, social hierarchies and the role of race and culture, Harry Potter as a literary subject, limits of the Harry Potter story, the role of government and corruption, children's literature, fantasy novels, and the Harry Potter fandom, and then Harry Potter as a coming-of-age story, specifically with the themes of death and love. So for this course, we had to read the entirety of the Harry Potter series. We read books 1, 2, and 3 in 1 week, and then books 4 through 7 were split up into 2 weeks, so we would read the first half of the book in 1 week and the second half of the book in the next week. We met once a week where we would usually have either a class-wide or small group discussion that was either preceded or proceeded by some kind of activity. One day we had Harry Potter classes, so we did Transfiguration, we made potions, we did History of Hogwarts. On other days, we would do things like scavenger hunts, or we would play Quidditch out on the lawn in front of the building, and things like that, yeah. In terms of assignments, besides the participation in class, each week we also had a book quiz where we would have to go and take the quiz to prove that we'd actually read the book, which for people who know the book series way too well like I do, isn't necessarily a good way of proving that you've read the book. We also had really cool events. We held the Yule Ball where we actually had to ask out our other classmates to go to the Yule Ball with us, and we dressed up and we played music and had refreshments. It was lots of fun. And then lastly, we had to do some kind of creative project at the end of the semester. It could be literally anything we wanted as long as it had something to do with the themes that we talked about in our class discussions about the books. So I ended up making these 3 little mock Instagram accounts for the trio characters of Harry Potter, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. In my experience with that class, clearly I think you guys can tell I really enjoyed that class. It was a lot of fun. If you have the opportunity to take a fun DeCal at Berkeley while you're here, I I would highly recommend it. It's a great way just to have like a set time every week to just meet with a bunch of other people who are nerdy about the same thing as you and get to like just focus on that thing and not think about anything else, especially if you take the Harry Potter one, because you just get to sit there and talk about Harry Potter, and for 2 hours nothing else matters. And sometimes you just really need that. The next class I want to talk about is Anthro 160 AC, Forms of Folklore, which, if I'm being completely honest, I'm a little annoyed that I had to take, but it ultimately ended up being okay, and let me tell you why. First of all, let's just quickly read the class description. It says, what is folklore? Many people think of folklore as a study of tall tales or fairy tales, whereas others will think of folk art, folk music, or folk medicine, while others still will think dismissively of folk medicine or folk belief. But so is graffiti, fan fiction, fan art, memes, and any number of expressive modes of material, verbal, and written culture generated by non-specialists in a field. Some describe folklore as those things that are a part of your cultural DNA, the taken for granted things in day-to-day life that you aren't even sure how you know them. So forms of folklore, given that class description, sounds pretty much like what it is. We looked at various ways in which folklore manifests. We looked at stories and storytelling, superstitions and belief, material culture. We also looked at humor. We looked at legends and myths, things like Bigfoot and Slender Man. Interestingly enough, we also looked at things like architecture, art and craft, music, basically anything that humans do or make or believe in can fall under the umbrella of folklore. This was a lecture style class where we met twice a week, and because this class was a little bit bigger than most of the anthropology lecture classes are, it also had a discussion section, so I also met once a week with my graduate student instructor, or GSI, with a smaller group of students in this classroom to talk about the course materials, as well as like work on our assignments and our projects. Speaking of which, in terms of assignments and projects, what did I have to do? Let me see. This class was also with Professor Lori Wilkie, who taught my historical archaeology class last semester, and Professor Wilkie is very big on like attendance and participation, so we were graded on whether or not we showed up to discussion section every week. We had one midterm, and for that midterm we had to ask a friend or a family member for like a beloved recipe for some kind of dish, and then we had to go find 9 variations of that recipe, either online or through books or through word of mouth, to look at the temporal and spatial spread of that dish and how it has changed through time and space and how it might mean different things to different people. I did my midterm on something called gooey butter cake, which is a St. Louis delicacy. It is the most disgustingly sugary Midwestern dessert you could ever think of, but it also has a really interesting folkloric aspect to it. It has like this mythological origin story from the 1930s, and it has these different variations that change depending on where you are and who you are. I just think it was a really cool assignment. Then we had our final, where in our discussion section we were broken up into 2 different groups. One group was looking at folkloric material that had to do with the Black Lives Matter movement, and the other group had to look at folkloric material associated with the pandemic. I was part of the pandemic group, and what we had to do for that was find some kind of folkloric material culture, or what we called a folkloric item. In our case, we decided to do face mask sewing patterns that were shared online. We had to collect 50 examples of them and then do another like temporal and spatial analysis of them to try and understand how this like folkloric craft of sewing was adapted under the conditions of something like the pandemic. So for that, we had to develop a presentation to share with everyone what our analysis looked like and what our conclusions were. We had to write a paper, and then we also had to take all of our folkloric materials and upload them to the Folklore archive that is here in UC Berkeley's Anthropology department. I ended up enjoying this class, even though it was relatively stressful, because it is a course that fulfills the American Cultures requirement at Berkeley. And the American Cultures requirement at Berkeley really annoys me because it is so specific that you cannot take it anywhere else but Berkeley. So despite the fact that Intro to Archaeology counts as an American Cultures class, the Intro to Archaeology class I took in community college didn't count. It's okay. In the end, I actually think this class really helped me think through how I might approach my graduate studies in fashion. I'm gonna just take a deep breath on that one and let it go. Moving on, let's talk about Media Studies 190, which is Beauty, Feminism, and Fashion in Global Popular Culture. I decided I wanted to take this class taught by Professor Mita Jha because one of the things that I am thinking about researching in graduate school has to do with social media, and so I wanted to be able to understand social media through the lens of media studies, specifically concerning fashion, feminism, beauty, gender, etc. The course description for this course says, drawing on the multidisciplinary field of feminist media and cultural studies, this course takes an intersectional and post-colonial feminist approach to examine gender, race, beauty, and fashion in popular media and culture. It explores the ways in which embodied femininity intersects with other aspects of identities such as race, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, and class. This was another lecture style class. It was actually kind of a big-ish lecture, but we didn't have discussion section for this one, and in terms of assignments, we really only had, what was it? We had participation, where we actually had to like sign into a participation tracker thing, which I thought was kind of weird because that's no professor has ever asked me to do that before. Then we had a midterm group presentation, a midterm exam, as well as a final group presentation and a final paper. Those were the 4 things we really got graded on. Our midterm group presentation, it was basically a form of revision or a form of studying where we had to go over the different terms and concepts from the class and try to describe them in our own words basically, so that when we got to the midterm, which was just a series of like short essay answers to a bunch of questions, we're already studied what the key concepts and terms were as well as the readings, and we were able to get through the midterm a little bit easier. For our final group presentation, we actually had to work with other people whose final paper topics were similar to ours, and then kind of use our collective similarity of research topic for our final paper to come up with some kind of general research question and create a presentation trying to answer that research question, which was oddly helpful. It helped me think through what I was going to write for my final paper, as well as figure out like which scholars that I was going to have to use in order to make my argument for my paper. Overall for this class, I mean, I've never taken a media studies class before, so I've also never taken like a gender studies or a feminism class. I was a little bit in over my head for this class. I was a little bit lost. She moved pretty quickly, assuming that we already understood certain concepts that I had not come up against before. I definitely had to be a lot more careful when I was doing my reading, and I had to like look up a lot more concepts and do a lot more self-study. Otherwise I would have been totally lost the entire semester. But I definitely did learn things that were going to be super helpful to me in graduate school, which is again why I wanted to take these classes. And I also actually encountered some articles in this class from fashion theorists who are teaching at universities on the East Coast. So I'm like super excited about that, and the fashion theory that they are talking about is just like super cool, mind-blowing, life-altering, and I cannot wait to explore it more in grad school. Let's go ahead and move on to my last one because I don't think I need to reiterate my URAP, which was the History of Art R1B, Reading and Writing about Visual Experience Understanding Textiles. The course description says, this course explores the visual, technological, and cultural significance of textiles. Specifically, we will look at cloth and its production as an expressive encoding technology and synesthesiac medium that combines visual and tactile sensibilities with a range of entangled meanings, histories, narratives, and uses. We will also consider everyday cloth, which is often not preserved nor a part of museum collections, but rather allowed and expected to decay. Hi! I am so sorry about that. My camera battery died. I got a little ambitious with what I thought I could do on campus, and I did not bring a backup battery, so we are back in my apartment. But that's okay because we only have the rest of that one class left to talk about, so let me tell you guys what we had to do for my textiles class in terms of assignments. It's there. Oh, you can see my boxes in the background. Hold on. I have to move out next week, so a lot of boxes. Anyways, for my textiles class, because this is a writing class, we did a lot of writing assignments as well as a lot of readings. So every week we had to do what's called a perusal reading, which is basically this piece of software where you go in and you read your readings as a PDF, and you have to include annotations, so basically like highlighting quotes, leaving questions, leaving little notes to yourself, and everyone in the class contributes to it, and this was part of our participation grade so that the professor could see that we were actually reading our readings. Then we also had a short diagnostic essay, I think it was only about 5 pages, to kind of gauge what our level of comfortability was with writing about art history. I'd never written anything about art history, and I managed to pull a 100% on that paper, so I'm pretty proud of myself for that. Then we had an at least 5-page midterm research paper where we had to explore encoded meanings embedded within the use of African wax cloth media and performance in either the works of Samuel Foso, Yinka Shonobare or Bisa Butler, or we could do like an analysis of multiple of those individuals. And because this was about textiles, we actually learned how to weave on like little teeny tiny frame looms. I actually think I have my weavings. So part of our grade was making a series of weavings, which I think was so much fun. This is one of the ones that I made. Ta-da! Then our final paper rough draft, and then our final paper, which had to be a minimum of 11 pages. I chose to write again about Yinka Shonobare. I basically took my midterm paper and expanded upon it and introduced fashion theory into this art history paper. So overall, a very cool paper. I really enjoyed this class and I really enjoyed the professor. However, it was a lower division writing course, which meant that we went over a lot of things that I already knew, especially since I have been in college for 8 years. If we count how long it took me to get through community college, and I'm a senior, so I was a little bored at certain points, though I did find myself being really stressed about the final paper because it is an art history paper and not an anthropology paper. So there were certain things that I just wasn't quite grasping when I was writing my rough draft. But I suppose my worries were unwarranted because I ended up with an A in the class. So that just about wraps up all the classes I took in my senior year at UC Berkeley. I'm sure this was a long video, a lot of information, but I really like sharing this information with you guys because I want to give anybody watching a little bit more insight into what taking classes at Berkeley is actually like, especially because when I was considering transferring to UC Berkeley, one of the things I was the most concerned about was the fact that like going to Berkeley and taking classes felt like this big black box. Like I had no idea what it would be like, what would be expected of me, how hard it was going to be, how much reading I had to do. So I really like to take my experience and share it with other people. So if you're thinking about coming to Berkeley, either as a freshman or a transfer student, this will help you understand a little bit more what professors are going to expect from you and hopefully make it a little bit less scary, because ultimately Berkeley has been a wonderful experience, and as intimidating as it might seem, it is most definitely worth your time. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording here. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to follow along on my graduate student moving to New York journey, go ahead and give me a subscribe. Don't forget to like the video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Bye!